Charles Fillmore, in his work, asks us a very provocative question. He says, are we willing to do the work of the mystics? I think that that's such a great question. These people that we, down through the ages, have put so much emphasis on, Jesus and Buddha and whoever else, are we willing to do the work that they do? It's interesting, Ernest Holmes, those who knew him tell us that he had a very youthful spirit. And in fact, his family referred to him as the question mark. And the other thing that's known about Holmes is that the traditions that he put together, the philosophy, is a tradition and a philosophy of personal accountability. So we think about that for a moment. We say, okay, there is this youthful spirit about Holmes. There's a youthful spirit about what he had to say. But there's also this personal accountability. And do those go together? And I would argue that they do. And the reason I'd argue that is because when we think of youthful spirit, sometimes we think of a young child, and everybody loves little kids, Their inquisitiveness and the way they run around and the fact that they like to play with the box instead of the gift and all that sort of thing. We love that about them. But what about another type of youth, which is known as the teenager? Especially as adults, do we love teenagers? You see, I would argue that the teenage part of youth is a very important part of the way Holmes was, because as I see Holmes, I don't see the child, I see the teenager. I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about by this, because I want to share a piece with you this morning, and I used this last week in the service, and it's a great piece. It's from a Zen Master, an anonymous Zen Master, and someone emailed me this, and I really appreciate that. And I used it last week, and it's one of those very provocative pieces. And I'd like to read this in two voices. I'm going to read through it the first time as the Zen Master, so I'll get the little furrowed brow. It'll be very, very sophisticated and very adult, and we'll read this with all of that sort of feeling. And then I'm going to read it a second time the way a teenager would read it, okay? So this is the first go through. This is let's see what kind of an actor I am. This is my Zen Master, okay? I see a person riding an ox, looking for an ox, searching for what isn't lost, climbing an invisible mountain, striving for what is already possessed, dividing people in order to unite, killing to achieve peace, working for grace, which is a gift, alienating to bring people together, questing for God while already standing on holy ground. Now let's try it like a teenager. Like I totally saw this person riding an ox, looking for an ox. Oh my God, searching for what isn't lost. Can you believe that? Climbing an invisible mountain. What is that about? Striving for what is already possessed. Hello, you've already got it. Oh, and I love this one. Dividing people in order to unite. Don't you hate that? I hate it when my parents do that. Killing to achieve peace. I mean, even I get that. You know what I'm saying? Working for grace, which is a gift. Why are you working for it? And alienating to bring together. Oh my God, my friend Mary, she does that all the time. And this is my favorite, right? All those old people that do this, questing for God while already standing on holy ground. You're there. What are you looking for? You see, that's Ernest Holmes. When I was a teenager, I was I say I grew up in the 60s, but I was kind of young, late 60s, early 70s. And there was a war going on. And I remember, and I grew up in a small town, and so I wasn't in the epicenter of all the things that were going on, but I remember taking in the protests that were going on. And it was interesting to me because the protests of the war that was going on when I was a child, for the most part, were young people, teenagers, college people, right? And I remember reading the literature, and my friends and I, we would swap the paperback books, right? I grew up in a religious family. I grew up in a Christian family, and I would go to church, and I would hear that Jesus was not for war. Jesus made peace and not war. And I would hear people say, we really hate war, and we really want and like peace. And so as a teenager, being a teenager and standing in that voice, I would say to people like my parents or to older people or whatever, I would say, if you like peace, how come you don't make it? And if you don't like war, how come you make that? Remember the old thing, make love and not war? And those kinds of ideas? Fillmore says to us, why are we not willing to do the work of the mystic? And the reason for this, and the reason, if we think about it for a moment, if the reason that we can say we don't like something and we create it, or we do like something and we don't create it, is not about what we say, it's about what we believe. And Fillmore in his work, and Holmes also in his work, they take the word belief and they say it is closely related to faith. And so the question becomes not so much, do I say that I want peace? Do I say that I like peace? Or the way to put it is, do I have the faith of peace? And if I am making war, is that the place that I have placed my faith? You see, for Charles Fillmore and Ernest Holmes, the idea of faith, and I want you to think about that for a moment in terms of, we say, someone will walk up to us and say, what faith do you belong to? Well, you can say, well, I'm a Methodist, and I'm a Catholic, I'm a Buddhist, I'm whatever. And what was interesting to them was, if we answer the question, what is your faith? Think about this for a moment. My faith is the faith of peace. My faith is the faith of abundance. My faith is the faith of wisdom. And so basically what this is saying is that as we begin to live our lives, as we begin to look around us and say what it is that we're actually about, then Ernest Holmes would say, the reason that teenagers drive us crazy, and it was interesting when I said teenagers earlier and we all laughed, including me, the reason that teenagers drive us crazy is because they're the great synchronizer of hypocrisy. When I was working before this incarnation, and I worked for 20 years with young people in corrections, I worked in a facility where we were a treatment facility in terms of dealing with drug addiction and criminal behavior, and we did family kinds of work, and we got guys who were sent to us for 6 months or a year. They were all convicted of felonies. They were all teenagers. And so we weren't, usually the first level of juvenile detention is the juvenile hall system where they go through courts and it's kind of local. And then if someone is bad enough or does something that society considers as bad enough, they get sent into what's called a custody situation, okay? And I worked in a custody situation. So we were doing all kinds of programs, behavior modification programs, drug programs, all kinds of things like that, trying to do family unification and stuff. And part of what went on in our program was what we called, and I was trying to remember this week what we called this. It was like a resident, a program resident council. And what that meant was a resident of a program would be part of this council. It's kind of like a student body council is what it was. We usually had, 8 or 10 guys who were on it. Within our facility, we had 60 people in a dorm, so 8 or 10 of them would be part of this. And I volunteered to be the staff member who met with them. I don't know why I did that. I was a masochist, I guess. But the whole idea, actually, I found it exciting. The whole idea was to come together with these young people and have weekly meetings, and they would talk about the program. And they would talk about what they were looking for in the program, and they would bring things forward. They would bring ideas forward. And they would, the reason I found it exciting is because they would talk about the things that they really needed in their lives, and how could we start to speak to some of those issues with some of our programs. And, they complained about the grilled cheese sandwiches and stuff too, but, you had to wade through all that. What I found was they were the great synchronizers of hypocrisy. And we would get into these conversations about if our program was standing for a particular value, was that really being held up in terms of what we were doing? If we are advocating a particular value, what is it that we're doing to uphold that value? That's a really interesting question. Basically, what Phil Moore is asking when he talks about are we willing to do the work of the mystic? He's basically saying, are we willing to step into that place and be the person who brings something forward? Remember, Ernest Holmes said, be for something against nothing. And the reason Holmes said that is because he believed that that's a universal principle, that no matter what we do, we are ultimately for something. We are ultimately for something. Even when we say we're against something, we are ultimately for something. If you look at nature, if you look at the world around you, if you look at the way people live lives, if you look at your own life, I would challenge that you would ultimately come up with that truth. That no matter what we say or do, even if we say we're against something, we are ultimately for something else. And so the question becomes, what am I for? The reason that we still have war today is because we are ultimately for war. We are ultimately good at making that. We are ultimately operating within the faith of war. But when we look at our lives, when we look at us as individuals and we move away from some of the larger issues that we face as people, the same question is true. Do I ultimately have faith in poverty or abundance? Do I ultimately have faith in love or condemnation? Do I ultimately have faith in showing up or abandoning? See, one of the things that's really sometimes a drag about living with a metaphysician, as I do, is that when I get off the phone with my family and I'm really bent and torqued and going off and saying terrible things, is the metaphysician I live with says, she'll listen to me for a while, not very long usually. She used to listen to me for a long time, now she doesn't. I don't know what that's about. Okay. It would probably help if I ever changed the tune, Heard this one before? Are you the rerun channel or what? Okay. So I get off the phone and I rant and rave, and she basically will ultimately say, Andy, what is it that you want to create? Well, yeah, but they don't want to create it. She said this and he said that. Andy, what is it that you want to create? Andy, where is your faith? Where is your faith? And so, basically, and we hear this all the time in whatever behavior modification system there is, a secular one, a spiritual one, whatever, is the thing act as if, fake it till you make it. What is it that I'm trying to create? What is it that I'm trying to step into? What is it that my actions and my ideas embody? And what Phil Moore basically says is, Are we willing to be the peacemakers? Are we willing to be those who are abundant? Are we willing to be loving? Are we willing to be wise? You know, I was reading Ernest Holmes this week. I'm doing a class right now, and Ernest Holmes said something to the effect, he said, once we step into the idea of evolution, then we move out of the long aisle of people who are walking along the same path. He talks about the spotlight of evolution falling upon us. And he says, at that moment, then we begin to think for ourselves. At that moment, we begin to shift our belief system. At that moment, we begin to have faith in something else. You know, we as human beings collectively have been doing a lot of things for a long time. And sometimes people say we do them because we can't do anything else. And what this philosophy says is we do them because we won't do something else. We won't stand in that place of a new faith. We won't stand in that place of a new belief system. Because as soon as we do, as soon as we step into a place of a new belief or a new faith, then suddenly we have a wheel. Suddenly we have fire. Suddenly we have music. Suddenly we have poetry. Suddenly we have the ability to fly. Suddenly we have the ability to sculpt. Suddenly we have the ability to write and to read and to communicate. All of those things begin with the idea of a new belief system and a new faith. In this class that I'm teaching right now, there's one part that asks the question, what is the religion of us? In other words, what is the religion of Andy? What are the tenets of my religion? What are the practices of my religion? What are the beliefs of my religion? What are the faiths of my religion? And what this question requires of us is that we can't go hide out and say, well, I'm a metaphysician, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Methodist. It says, no, what is the religion of you? What is the faith of you? So, is the faith in the religion of Andy a faith and religion of abundance? Is it a faith and religion of peace? Is it a faith and religion of wisdom? Is it a faith and religion of love? Am I willing to step into those practices? Ernest Holmes says, this power, call it God, creative force, first cause, infinite parent, reacts to us, creates a tendency in law according to the sum total of our belief, our conviction, our personal truth, our faith. Those words, conviction and belief and truth. You know, think about the emotional energy when we hear a word like conviction. When's the last time that we stood in absolute conviction over something called wisdom or love or peace or abundance? Instead of fighting poverty, are we in the business of creating abundance? Instead of fighting war, are we creating peace? Instead of separation, are we creating connectedness? That's what Holmes is asking us. Today, when you walked in, you got a card. And within those cards, mixed in amongst all of you, there are 10 different beliefs. And these 10 different beliefs represent our philosophy. And it's sort of like a fortune cookie, right? You walked in, you got something, and that's what it was. But I think that even with fortune cookies, I don't believe that there's any accidents. And I think that we attract to us something that we need, somewhere within our psychology, somewhere within our belief system, somewhere within our consciousness, we are looking for a particular idea. And my desire is that whatever belief you got today, whatever belief statement you got, speaks to you in some way. But the reason you have this card, and I'm asking you to please take it with you today when you leave. And I'm asking you to take this card and to look at it and read it, and throughout the next week or so, imagine what it would be to live what that card says. In other words, whatever it may be, are people you're going to encounter, are they going to somehow pick up on the fact that this is your belief system? How will you take this belief system into the world? How will you do, as Charles Fillmore would say, how are you going to do the work of the mystic in the world this week with that particular belief system? Because some of those belief systems that some of you got, are not really belief systems that are shared by the larger culture, by the larger society. So how do we embody that? How do we carry a belief system forward? You know, we as human beings, we've been given this gift of language, which is I love the gift of language. Pull a string, I can talk. I can do an hour on anything, right? So I love language. But it's amazing to me because what I found in my own life is that the people who have impressed me the most with their belief system have shown me what their belief system is. And they've allowed me to feel what their belief system is. And they somehow stand in it and embody it. I love that word embody a belief system. I gave a talk on this a few years ago, but there's a member of my family, my extended family, that I have a great deal of respect for. And the reason I do, first of all, she's a wonderful person. She's an artist. She was an architect. She's of a generation of women. There weren't very many, if any, not very many architects around. She worked in a firm in San Francisco. She had a beautiful home in the hills above San Francisco, up in the trees. A wonderful person. And I admire her so much because of all my entire family, as far as I can see, if I were to stand on the mountain of my family and look out at all those people, as far as I can see, they're basically all, some stripe or variation of being Christian, which is fine. And I'm the only metaphysician, except for her. And you know what? Everyone really likes her. They love her. They go visit her. They listen to her. They spend time with her. With me, not so much. And I have always found that I love her, and I've found her to be so challenging to me in a really good way. How does she do that? And I'll tell you how. She just simply lives her belief. She simply has complete conviction in who and what she is, and she doesn't frickin' talk about it. She just does it. And they all know who she is. She's got the costume. She wears a crystal once in a while, And I look at that and I find that to be so amazing that she has this incredible ability to do that, and it's so inspiring to me. And it is basically, she is doing, as Fillmore would say, she's doing the work of the mystic. She's out there. She just is. I think that if we were to run into Jesus, we would just get it from Jesus, or Buddha, or Muhammad, or any of the, Martin Luther King, Gandhi. We would just get it. We would just understand what they're about. They wouldn't have to be jumping up and down and yelling and screaming and talking and talking and talking. They would just be that thing. They would just be the peace, be the wisdom, be the love, be the joy. I remember as a teenager in Christian churches and, being kind of in conflict and being, rebelling and everything. But then there was that part of me that, I was kind of freaked out about the way I was living, and I was kind of breaking away from it all. And I absolutely love in the New Testament the various stories of Jesus, how he was there for people like, prostitutes and lepers and children. And a lot of when you read the New Testament, a lot of it was just him showing up. He was just there. Suffer the little children to come unto me. They want to throw rocks at a prostitute. Basically, yeah, there was a few words there, but basically he stood in front of the people and said, no. You want to throw a rock, throw it at me. That's amazing to me. You remember the guy in Tiananmen Square who stood in front of the tank? He didn't say anything. He just stood there. And every once in a while I catch that photo somewhere, and you totally know what he was all about. You totally know the religion of him was, the belief of him was, the conviction of him was, as he stood in front of that tank. That's amazing to me. According to the Bible, it is done unto you as you believe. It is done unto you as your faith dictates. Why does he stand in front of a tank? Because that's what he believes. Our belief system, what was once called religious science and is now referred to as New Thought, Centers for Spiritual Living. We teach that if there is something in our life that we do not like, and there is something else that we are for, then we have to do the work at the level of the belief system. Psychology calls it behavior modification. We call it prayer. And basically what we say is if there is something that I want to make, if there is something I want to be for, then I begin to do the spiritual practice of prayer. And I put myself in that place. And I embody that place with feeling, with thought, with words, with energy. And if I want to be a peacemaker, then I become that peacemaker in prayer. If I want to exhibit wisdom, I become that wise one in prayer. If I want to live an abundant life, then I embody that I embody that abundance in prayer. When we talk around here about our prayer ministry, these people called practitioners, they are the ones who can take a belief system that we are so dearly trying to get to. See, words are easy. Words are easy. I'm Superman. That's easy. Do you believe it? I don't believe it. I'm Superman. That was easy. Belief is something else. And in order to travel that bridge of belief, there are times when we really need someone to walk that bridge with us, to walk that path with us. That's why one of the biggest cornerstones of our belief system, our philosophy, is prayer practice, our prayer partners. That's why we teach so much prayer. And I'd like to have someone come up who's our practitioner today, Sheila McDonald, who will know the truth for you.